All right, good morning. Once again, this is another Python basics tutorial. This is part 7. We'll be continuing where we left off yesterday. I'll be playing it a little bit before our next tutorial lesson. Yesterday we learned how to create some gaming language. But we will continue. I know usually I have an intro and an outro started, but we're going to get straight to it. All right. For those on the replay and for those on the live session, thank you for joining. And let's go.
Beautiful. Now let's stop it. It says the car is stopped. Let's stop it one more time. We get this message again. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about for loops in Python. In the last tutorial, you learned about while loops. You learned that we use while loops to execute a block of code multiple times. In Python, we have another kind of loop that is a for loop, and we use that to iterate over items of a collection, such as a string, because a string is a sequence of characters. So it looks like a collection. So we can use a for loop to iterate over each character in a string and then do something with it. Here's an example. We type out for, then we define a variable. This is what we call a loop variable. In each iteration, this variable will hold one item. So let's call it item. In here, we type out a string like Python and then colon. So with this for loop, we can iterate over this string. And in each iteration, this item variable will hold one character at a time. In the first iteration, it will be set to P. Then in the second iteration, it will be set to Y. In the third iteration, it will be set to T and so on. Okay. So here we are inside our for block because of the indentation here. So whatever we type here will be executed in each iteration. For now, we can simply print this item. Now, let's run this program and see what happens. So you can see each character in our string is printed on a new line. Let's look at another example. In Python, we can define lists using square brackets. So let me remove this string from here.
Oh, just quick pause too. Indentations are important. Yesterday I was practicing using some of this coding information, and I had my indentations wrong, and Python created an error code, so you actually might see an error code. So just make sure that your indentations are set up correctly, and if for some reason you do see that error code, try your best to correct that indentation. So let's continue.
And define a list using square brackets. A list is simply a list of items, like a list of numbers, a list of customers, a list of emails, products, blog posts, whatever. So here we can define a list of names like Mosh, John, Sarah, and then go ahead, run our program. So you can see in each iteration, we get one name and print it on a new line.
Okay, so this looks pretty important here, because if you're dealing with lists and data, so it actually looks pretty powerful that you can use. So anyway, we'll continue.
We can also loop over a list of numbers. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's run it. Again, we see each number on a new line. But what if we want to iterate over a large list of numbers? We don't want to explicitly type out a list with, let's say, 100 or 1,000 numbers. We don't want to type 5, 6, 7, all the way to 100. That is when we use the range function. So let me delete this. In Python, we have a built-in function called range for creating a range of numbers. So we give it a number, let's say 10. Let's run this program. Now we can see here on the terminal, we have numbers 0 all the way to 9. So 10 is not included. So basically, when we call the range function, this range function creates an object. It's not a list, it's a special kind of object that we can iterate over. In each iteration, this object will spit out a new number. We can also work with a range of numbers here. Let's say we want to start from 5 and go all the way to 10. So let's run our program. Now we have the numbers 5, 6, 7, and 9. Also, this range function can optionally take a step. So we can pass 2 as the step to this function. And when we run our program, you can see that our first number is 5. Now we go 2 steps forward to get 7. Once again, we go 2 steps forward, we get 9, and that is the end of our range. So this is the basics of using for loops in Python. Now here's an exercise for you. I want you to write a program to calculate the total cost of all the items in a shopping cart. So let's say we have a list of prices like 10, 20, and 30. I want you to use a for loop to calculate the total cost of all the items in our imaginary shopping cart. So calculate that and then print it on a terminal. That's pretty easy, and you should do it in a couple of minutes. So as you learned, we use for loops to iterate over all the items in a collection. A collection can be a string, it can be a list, it can be a range object that is returned from the range function, anything, any kind of object that has multiple items. So in this example, we're going to use a for loop to iterate over the list of prices. So for item in prices, colon, and by the way, this loop variable, we don't have to call this item. You can call it anything. For example, in this case, we can rename it to price. So for price in prices.
All right, so go ahead and type that line of code there. Let me go see if I can maximize that window a little bit. All right, prices in prices, okay.
Now in each iteration, this price will hold one value. In the first iteration, it's going to hold 10, then it's going to be 20, and then it's going to be 30. So we need to define another variable to calculate the total. So we define that outside of our for loop. Let's call it total. And initially, we set it to 0. Now, in each iteration, we get the current price and add it to the total. So we write total equals total plus price. Or, as you learned earlier, we can use the augmented assignment operator to simplify this code. So,
all right. So first line of prices equal 10, 20, and 30. All right. Line 3 total equals. Okay, for loop price and prices. Total price. All right.
after our for loop, this total variable has the total of all the prices. We can simply print it here, or we can use a formatted string. So a string prefixed with F. We add a label like total, curly braces, to dynamically include some value in our string. In this case, our total variable. So let's go ahead and run this program. There you go. So the total.
All right, so line 6, you're gonna print. Colon total. Let's see, run. All right.
Cost of all the items in our imaginary shopping cart is 60. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about nested loops in Python. Using a nested loop basically means adding one loop inside of another loop. And with this technique, we can do some amazing things. For example, we can easily generate a list of coordinates. So a coordinate, as you know, is a combination of an x and y value. Let's say
I believe you said coordinate, but yeah.
0 and 0. Now, let's say we want to generate a list of coordinates like this. So we have 0 and 0, then we'll have 0 and 1, then 0 and 2. Next, we're going to change x, so we're going to use 1 for the x. And once again, we're going to use these three values for the y coordinates. So 1 and 0, then 1 and 1, and 1 and 2. You got the point. We can easily generate these coordinates using nested loops. Let me show you. So we start with one loop, let's say for x in range 4. With this loop, we can generate values for the x coordinate. Let's print this on the terminal. Okay, so we get the values 0 to 3. Now, for each x, like 0, we should generate a few y values. So that is where we use a nested loop. So inside of this loop, we're going to add another loop. So instead of just printing x, first we want to add another loop for y in range, let's say 3. Now we can print x and y together. So print, here we use a formatted string to display coordinates like this. So we add parentheses. Inside of this parenthesis, first we need to add x, so curly braces, x, then a comma, followed by another set of curly braces, and y. Let's run this program and see what we get. There you go. So we have these coordinates 0 and 0, 0 and 1, 0 and 2. Then we have 1 and 0, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, and so on. So let me explain exactly how this program gets executed. So in the first iteration of our outer loop, x is 0, right? Now we are on line 2. Here we have a new loop, which we call an inner loop. In this inner loop, in the first iteration, y is going to be 0. So we'll print 0 and 0 on the terminal. Now the control goes back to line 2, or our inner loop. In this second iteration, y will be set to 1, but we're still in the first iteration of our outer loop. So x is still 0, but now y is incremented to 1. So that is why we see 0 and 1 on the terminal. Once again, the control goes back to line 2. We are in the third iteration of our inner loop. So this will continue until this inner loop completes. That is when y reaches 2, because this range function generates number 0 to 3, but not including 3. So we'll have 0, 1, and 2. After this inner loop completes, then the control goes back to line 1. At this point, we're going to be in the second iteration of our outer loop. So x will be 1, then the control will be moved to line 2, or our inner loop. At this point, this range function is going to generate the numbers 0 to 3 one more time. So this inner loop will be executed 3 times, and then we'll go back to our outer loop. So this is how nested loops get executed. Okay, here's an exercise for you, but this one is a little bit more challenging than the exercises you have done so far. So I really don't expect you to do it, but if you do it, wow, I will be so proud of you. So see what I have done here? Using nested loops, I've written some code to draw this F shape. Can you see that? So let me give you a hint. First of all, we have this list called numbers. In this list, we have these values, 5, 2, 5, 2, 2. These values determine the number of x's we have on each line. So, for example, the first item in this list, this tells us that we should have 5 x's on the first line. There you go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the second line, we're going to have 2 x's. On the third line, we're going to have 5 x's, like this. So I've written code to convert a simple list of numbers into a shape like this. Now here's a tip for you. Using a for loop, you need to iterate over this list. In each iteration, you get one number. This determines the number of x's to be displayed on that particular line. So if you want to cheat, you can get this number and multiply it by a string that contains x. So if you multiply x by 5, you'll get 5 x's. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to use an inner loop here to generate a string that contains 5x's. So imagine in Python, we cannot multiply a string by a number. So to solve this problem, we need a nested loop. So go ahead and spend 5 minutes on this exercise. And by the way, do your best to solve this. It is a little bit challenging, but it's not extremely difficult. It just requires a little bit of focus. You'll see my solution next. All right, so first we need to iterate over all the items in this list. So for item in numbers, or we could rename this variable to x underline count. That is the number of x's on each line, okay? Now, I told you that if you want to cheat, you can write code like this. Print x times x underline count. If you run...
All right, so let's go. Numbers. All right. 5, 2, 5, 2, and 2. All right, and then line 2 is, I'm going to write your for loop. That.
Run this program, we get the same output. So this is the beauty of Python. With Python,
all right, go ahead and run that. All right.
Python, we can write expressions like this. We can multiply a string by a number to repeat it. A lot of other programming languages don't support this feature. But for this exercise, I wanted you to imagine that we don't have this feature in Python, so you would have to use an inner loop to solve this problem. Here's how it works. In the first iteration, x count is going to be 5. So we need to generate 5 x's. How can we do that? Well, let's say we define a variable called output, and initially we set it to an empty string. Now we need to add 5 x's to this string. So we can use another loop for count in range of x underline count. So we're using the range function to generate a sequence of numbers from 0 up to x count. So in our first iteration, x count is going to be 5. So range of 5 would generate the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this inner loop will be executed 5 times. That is exactly what x count represents. So now, in each iteration, we simply need to append an x to our output variable. So we said output plus equals x. And then after this inner loop, we simply print the output. With this, we'll print 5 x's on the first row. Then we go to the second iteration of our outer loop. At this point, x count is going to be 2. Now, on line 3, we're going to reset our output variable to an empty string. So we start over. Then we go to our inner loop. This loop will be executed 2 times, so we'll append 2 x's to the output variable and then print it. As simple as that. So see, it wasn't really that difficult, but it was slightly more difficult than the previous exercises. So let's run this program. There you go. Now, if you're adventurous, I want you to modify the values that we have in our numbers list to print an L here. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to take a closer look at lists.
All right. So we're going to move on now to lists. Or actually a closer look to lists.
So I'm going to define a list of names. Let's set them to John, Bob, Mosh, Sarah, and Mary. So if we print this list here, what we see on the terminal looks exactly like how we define our list. So we have square brackets, And in between these square brackets, we have our items. So we have 5 strings in this list. Now we can also access an individual element using an index, just like how we can access an individual character in a string using an index. So here we type out square brackets and specify an index. The index of the first item in this list is 0. So let's run this program. There you go. We get John. Now, if you want to print out the third element in this list, its index is 2. So names of 2 returns Mosh. Now we can also pass a negative index here. So -1 refers to the last item in this list, that is Mary. Let's run the program. There you go. We see Mary. If you pass -2, this returns the second item from the end of the list. So let's run the program. There you go. We get Sarah. So this is exactly like accessing individual characters in a string. We can also use a colon to select a range of items. For example, if you pass 2 colon, this will get all the items starting from the index of 2, that is Mosh here, all the way to the end of the string. So let's run this program. There you go. We get this list with 3 items, Mosh, Sarah, and Mary. We can also specify an end index, let's say 4. So this will return all the items up to this index, but it doesn't include the item at this index. So when we run this program, we only see Mosh and Sarah. The item at index 4, which is the 5th element or the 5th item in this list, is not returned. So Mary is not returned. Okay. And also here we have default values. So if we leave out the end index, this expression is going to return all the items starting from the index of 2 to the end of the list. Or if you leave out the start index, this expression assumes 0 as the default index, so it will return all the items from the beginning to the end of the list, okay? And by the way, just like strings, these square brackets here don't modify our original list. They simply return a new list. For example, if we pass 2 here, you can see this returns a new list with 3 items. So if we go back here and print our original list of names right after, you can see it's not affected. So whenever we use square brackets with a colon to select a range of items, we get a new list. And by the way, we can also modify any of the elements in this list. For example, let's say we made a mistake and the first item shouldn't be spelled John with an H. So we want to remove the H. That is very easy. So we access it using an index, that is names of 0, and we set it to a new value like this. Now, let's print our list. So you can see the first item in this list is now updated. So this is the basics of lists. And here's an exercise for you. I want you to write a program to find the largest number in a list. This is a fantastic exercise for beginners. So go ahead and spend a few minutes on this and then come back, continue watching. All right, let's define a list of numbers with a bunch of random numbers, 3, 6, 2, 8, 4, and 10. Now,
all right, so go ahead and clear out your code. And let's do some numbers here. All right, 3, 6, 2, 8, 4, and 10. 6, 2, 8, 4, and 10. All right.
to find the largest number in this list, we need to define another variable. Let's call it max. This variable will hold the largest number. Now, initially, we want to assume that the first item in this list is the largest number. So we set max to numbers of 0. We're only assuming that the first item is the largest number. Chances are our assumption is wrong.
All right, so let's go max numbers.
So we need to iterate over this list. We need to loop through it, get each item, and compare it with max. If it's greater than max, then we need to reset max to that number. So in the first iteration, we get 3, and max is also 3. Is 3 greater than 3? No, so we move on. We get the second number. Is 6 greater than 3? It is, so we need to reset max to 6. Once again, we continue. We get 2. Is 2 greater than 6? No, it's not, so we move on. Then we get 8. Is 8 greater than 6? It is, so we should reset max to 8. That is pretty easy. So here we need a for loop for number in numbers, colon. Now we need to check to see if this number is greater than max. So,
all right. So line 3, number and numbers.
if number is greater than max, colon, then we need to reset max. So we set max to this new number. That's
all right. So for number and numbers, number is greater than max. All right, max number.
all we had to do. So let's print max and run our program.
All right, print max. Run it. All right, so numbers.
We can see the largest number in this list is 10. It doesn't matter whether this number is at the end of the list or at the beginning. So if I move 10 and put it right at the beginning, we should still see the same result. Let's run our program. We still see 10. If I put this somewhere in the middle, our program should still work. Let's put it right after 2. Run the program. We still get 10.
All right, so we're gonna stop there because it is close to 7:30, and I guess we're gonna be continuing with lists, and hopefully everyone is enjoying these tutorials and learning. And if you have any questions, you can always go back to the video to do these exercises. So have a wonderful day. And on that note, we'll be seeing you tomorrow for, I believe it's lesson 7 or 8, I think. 8's tomorrow. Yes, tutorial 8 is tomorrow. So have a good one, and on that note, be safe.